Introduction 1831. The publishers of the standard novels, in selecting Frankenstein for one of their series, expressed a wish that I should furnish them with some account of the origin of the story. I am the more willing to comply because I shall thus give a general answer to the question so very frequently asked me. How I, then a young girl, came to think of and to dilate upon so very hideous of idea. It is true that I am very averse to bringing myself forward in print, but as my account will only appear as an appendage to a former production, and as it will be confined to such topics as have connection with amateurship alone, I can scarcely accuse myself of a personal intrusion. It is not singular that, as the daughter of two persons of distinguished literary celebrity, I should very early in life I thought of writing. As a child I scribbled. My favorite pastime, during the hours given me for recreation, was to write stories. Still, I had a dearer pleasure than this, which was the formation of castles in the air, the indulging in waking dreams, the following up trains of thought which had for their subject the formation of succession of imaginary incidents. My dreams were at once more fantastic and agreeable than my writings. In the latter, I was a close imitator, rather doing as others had done than putting down the suggestion of my own mind. What I wrote was intended at least for one other eye, my childhood's companion and friend. But my dreams were all my own. I accounted for them to nobody. They were my refuge when annoyed, my dearest pleasure when free. I lived principally in the country as a girl and passed a considerable time in Scotland. I made occasional visits to more picturesque parts, but my habitual residence was on the blank and dreary northern shores of the Tay, near Dundee. Blank and dreary, on retrospection I called them. They were not so to me then. They were the eyrie of freedom and the pleasant region where unheeded I could commune with the creatures of my fancy. I wrote then, but in the most commonplace style. It was beneath the trees of the grounds belonging to our house, or on the bleak sides of the woodless mountain near that my true compositions, the airy flights of my imagination, were born and fostered. I did not make myself the heroine of my tales. Life appeared to me too commonplace an affair as regarded myself. I could not figure to myself that romantic, whose or wonderful events would ever be my lot. But I was not confined to my own identity, and I could people the hours with creation far more interesting to me at that age than my own sensations. After this, my life became busier, and reality stood in place of fiction. My husband, however, was, from the first, very anxious that I should prove myself worthy of my parentage and roll myself on the page of fame. He was forever inciting me to obtain literary reputation, which even on my own part I cared for then, though since I have become infinitely indifferent to it. At this time, he desired that I should write, not so much with the idea that I could produce anything worthy of notice, but that he might himself judge how far I possessed the promise of better things hereafter. Still, I did nothing. Traveling and the cares of family occupied my time, and study in the way of reading or improving my ideas in communication with his far more cultivated mind was all of literary employment that engaged my attention. In the summer of 1816, we visited Switzerland and became the neighbors of Lord Byron. At first, we spent our pleasant hours on the lake or wandering on its shores. And Lord Byron, who was writing the third canto of Childe Harold, was the only one among us who put his thoughts upon paper. This, as he brought them successively to us, clothed in all the light and harmony of poetry, seemed to stamp as divine the glories of heaven and earth, whose influences we partook with him. But it proved a wet, ungenial summer, and incessant rain often confined us for days to the house. Some volumes of ghost stories, translated from the German to French, fell into our hands. There was the history of the inconstant lover, who, when he thought to clasp the bride to whom he had pledged his vows, found himself in the arms of the pale ghost of her whom he had deserted. There was the tale of the sinful founder of his race, whose miserable doom it was to bestow the kiss of death on all the younger sons of his fated house, just when they reached the age of promise. His gigantic, shadowy form, clothed like the ghost in Hamlet, in complete armor, but with the beaver up, was seen at midnight by the moon's fitful beams to advance slowly along the gloomy avenue. The shape was lost within the shadow of the castle walls, but soon a gate swung back, a step was heard, the door of the chamber opened, and he advanced to the couch of the blooming youth, cradled in happy sleep. Eternal sorrow sat upon his face as he bent down and kissed the forehead of the boys, who, from that hour, withered like flowers snapped upon the stalk. I have not seen these stories since then, but their incidents are as fresh in my mind as if I read them yesterday. We will each write a ghost story, said Lord Byron, and his proposition was acceded to. There were four of us. The noble author began a tale, a fragment of which he printed at the end of his poem of Mazeppa. Shelley, more apt to embody ideas and sentiments in the radiance of brilliant imagery and in the music of the most melodious verse that adorn our language, than to invent the machinery of a story, commenced one founded on the experience of his early life. Poor Polidori had some terrible ideas about a school-headed lady who was so punished for peeping through a keyhole, or to see I forget. Something very shocking and wrong, of course. But when she was reduced to a worse condition than the renewed Tom of Coventry, he did not know what to do with her, and was obliged to dispatch her to the tomb of the Capulets, the only place for which she was fitted. The lustrous poets also, annoyed by the platitude of prose, speedily relinquished their congenial task. I busied myself to think of a story to rival those which had excited us to this task. One which would speak to the mysterious fears of our nature and awaken thrilling horror. One to make the reader dread to look round, to curdle the book, and quicken the beatings of the heart. If I did not accomplish these things, my ghost story would be unworthy of its name. I thought and pondered. I felt that blank incapacity of invention is the greatest misery of authorship when doing nothing replies to our anxious invocation. Have you thought of a story? I was asked each morning, and each morning I was forced to reply with a mortifying narrative. Everything must have a beginning, to speak in ancient phrase, and that beginning must be linked to something that went before. The Hindus give the world an elephant to support it, but they make the elephant stand upon the tortoise. Invention must be humbly admitted, does not consist in creating out of void, out of chaos. The materials must, in the first place, be offered it. It can give form to dark, shapeless substances, but cannot bring into being the substance itself. In all matters of discovery and invention, even of those that appertain to the imagination, we are continually reminded of the story of Columbus and his eggs. Invention consists in the capacity of seizing on the capacity. Invention consists in the capacity of seizing on the capabilities of a subject, and in the power of molding and fashioning ideas suggested to it. Many and long were the conversations between Lord Byron and Shelley, to which I was devout but nearly silent listener. During one of these, various philosophical doctrines were discussed, and among others, the nature of the principle of life, and whether there was any probability of its ever being discovered and communicated. They talked of experiments of Dr. Darwin. I speak not of what the doctor really did or said that he did, but as more to my purpose, of what was then spoken of as having been done by him, who preserved a piece of vermicelli in a glass case, till by some extraordinary means began to move with voluntary motion. Not thus, after all, would life be given. Perhaps a course would be reanimated. Galvanism had given token of such things. Perhaps the component part of a creature might be manufactured, brought together, and endued with wither warmth. Night waned upon this talk, and even the witching hour had gone by before we retired to rest. When I placed my head on my pillow, I did not sleep, nor could I be sad to think. My imagination, unbidden, possessed and guided me, gifting the successive images that arose in my mind with vividness far beyond the usual bounds of reverie. I saw, with shut eyes but acute mental vision, I saw the pale student of an allowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then, on the working of some powerful engine, shows signs of life, a stir within an uneasy, half-vital motion. Frightful must it be, for supremely frightful would be the effect of any human endeavor to mock the stupendous mechanism of the creator of the world. His success would terrify the artist. He would rush away from his hideous handiwork, horror-stricken. He would hope that, left to itself, the slight spark of life which he had communicated with faith, that thing which had received such imperfect animation would subside into dead matter, and he might sleep in the belief that the silence of the grave would quench for ever the transient existence of the hideous corpse which he had looked upon as the cradle of life. He sleeps, but he is awakened. He opened his eyes. Behold, the horrid being stand at his bedside, opening his curtains and looking on him with yellow, watery, but speculative eyes. I opened mine in terror, The idea was so possessed my mind that a thrill of fear ran through me, and I wished to exchange the ghastly image of my fancy for the realities around. I see them still. The very room, the dark parquet, the closed shutters, with the moonlight struggling through, and the sense I had that the glassy lake and wide high Alps were beyond. I could not so easily get rid of my hideous phantom. Still, I haunted her. I might try to think of something else. I recurred to my ghost story, my tiresome, unlucky ghost of story. Oh, if I could only contrive one which would frighten my reader as I myself have been frightened that night. Swift as light and as cheering was the idea that broke upon me. I have found it. What terrified me will terrify others, and I need only describe the spectre which had haunted my midnight pillow. On the morrow, I announced that I had thought of a story. I began that day with the words, "It was on a dreary night of November," making only the transcript of the grim terrors of my waking dream. At first I thought but a few pages, a short tale, but Shelley urged me to develop the idea at a greater length. I certainly did not owe the suggestion of one act incident, nor scarcely of one train of feeling to my husband, and yet, but for his incitement, would never have taken the form in which it was presented to the world. From this declaration, I might expect the preface. As far as I can recollect, it was entirely written by him. And now, once again, I bid my hideous progeny go forth and prosper. I have an affection for it, for it was the offspring of happy days when death and grief were but words, which found no true echo in my heart. Its several pages speaks of many a walk, many a drive, many a conversation when I was not alone. And my companion was one who, in this world, I shall never see more. But is for myself. My readers have nothing to do with these associations. I will add but one word as to the alteration I have made. There are principally those of style. I changed no portion of the story nor introduced any new ideas or circumstances. I have mended the language where it was so bold as to interfere with the interest of the narrative. And these changes occur almost exclusively, and these changes occur almost exclusively in the beginning of the first volume. Throughout, they are entirely confined to such parts as are mere adjunctions to the story, leaving the coherent substance for it untouched. M.W.S. London, October 15th, 1841.